Brexit has gripped British society for nearly 3 years. As Britain prepares to leave the EU on the 29th of March 2019, much uncertainty hangs in the air. On Wednesday, Theresa May survived a confidence vote, winning 200 votes to 117. However, the numbers also show how divided her party is. So what is the next play for May, and what could happen before the Brexit vote in January? What if the UK faces a no-deal Brexit? And how can Brexit affect global markets? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio with Bruno Maçães, the former Portuguese Europe Minister and visiting fellow at Renmin University, and also Mr. William Spears, Chairman of Spearhead China Ltd, and also Treasurer, British Chamber of Commerce in China. We'll also be talking to Mr. Alexander Mercuries, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran in London via satellite. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Li Qiuyuan. So let's talk about this. May already survived the no-confidence vote, but is she on track to deliver a Brexit deal? Let me start with you, Mr. Spears. What does this all mean for her and the Brexit process?
Well, Theresa May, she's between the devil and the deep blue sea. She is not on a winner either way, unfortunately. Even though she won her confidence vote, it was only 117, so in actual fact that's a third of her own MPs were against her. When she went to Europe and spoke to Mr. Juncker, unfortunately there were no concessions that the MPs were looking for, and he has said categorically there is going to be no renegotiation. There may be certain words to make it more clear, but no renegotiation. That means the big problem is with the backstop, Northern Ireland. That's a very big issue. And of course that stems from the Northern Ireland problems many years ago. And if you have a hard border, we may get problems again. And Northern Ireland is part of the UK. It was Great Britain and Northern Ireland, remember that. And she is part of the Conservative and Unionist Party.
Wow. Things are not looking so bright for May. What do you think on all this from your observation, from your standpoint?
Looks very difficult for her. She was thinking about getting a vote, which was eventually postponed. I heard from people inside the Conservative Party that she would lose by 3-digit margin. And I don't think anything has changed. She needed some concessions from Brussels last night in order to change that dynamic. She didn't get them. So it looks like the vote, when it comes after Christmas, we are told, is going to be very difficult for her to win.
Well, Mr. Mercuries, let me bring you in. You're in London. Earlier, I spoke with our London correspondent. He said, you know, Britain is now stuck in an internal Brexit loop of chaos. Speak to us, talk to us about the general sentiment there. How are public reacting to all of this?
I think this is correct because, first of all, the fundamental problem that Mrs. May has is that there is no majority in the House of Commons or any political majority within her party for any conceivable Brexit that would both reconcile the demands of her own party and that of the European Union. So she has been looking for this magic compromise between these two incompatible positions, and she cannot find it. So increasingly, and this is my fear, and I think it is the fear of many people here, we are drifting into a situation on the 29th of March where no agreement will have passed the House of Commons or will have been signed off by the European Union. And Britain is now trying to prepare very hard for this situation where there is no agreement with the European Union, but nothing has yet been resolved. So businesses are uncertain what to do. The markets are very volatile here. Sterling has been going up and down, and there is great uncertainty, both about the political situation with Theresa May's position, in my opinion, still far from secure, and also, of course, the general mood in the country is fragile, and the direction of the economy is unsure.
And now she already delayed her Brexit deal vote, which is known as the withdrawal agreement, on the 11th, knowing that most MPs will vote against it. Now, the most controversial part is said to be the Northern Irish backstop. Talk to us about this, Mr. Mercuries. What are the latest positions from relevant party on this issue, and why does it matter so much amid all this chaos?
Right. Right. The important thing to understand about the backstop is that Northern Ireland, though it is a part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain, occupies a somewhat anomalous position within it, in that there is a large population within Northern Ireland who want to see Northern Ireland unite with the Irish Republic to the south. Now, there was a long conflict in Northern Ireland, a violent conflict, and that conflict was eventually negotiated. A settlement was negotiated, part of which allowed for movement of people, free movement of people between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, thereby satisfying the feelings of those people in Northern Ireland who have a feeling of unity with the Irish Republic. That was possible within the European Union. But of course, if Britain leaves the European Union, especially if no arrangements, no trade or other arrangements have been agreed, that no longer becomes possible. That soft border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic no longer becomes possible, because there would then be customs checks and border controls and all the usual things. And of course, the fear is that that will reignite the conflict in Northern Ireland. Now, the Irish Republic, which is a member of the European Union, is adamant that it will not agree to any position, that any agreement with Britain that makes that soft border, which exists now, into a hard one. And the British confirmed that they would not let that happen, and that is the backstop. Now, the problem is, the backstop essentially gives the Irish Republic and the rest of the European Union a veto on the terms of Britain leaving entirely the customs arrangements it has with the European Union, because of course if the Irish say this does not satisfy the need for a soft border, then that exit, that final exit, cannot happen. This is, for many people in Britain, especially within the Conservative Party, the major issue, because they say we cannot agree to an agreement with Brussels that keeps us tied to the European Union indefinitely and which is subject to this sort of veto. So this is the major sticking point in the negotiations now.
No doubt, this is the major sticking point. But Mr. Spears, is it possible that Britain can resolve the Irish border dispute? Can they be able to get it passed by the divided Parliament?
The big problem is that, unfortunately, Mr. Juncker of the European Union has not been flexible. He has not been flexible since David Cameron first went across to get some concessions, to get his MPs behind him. No one has been flexible after that. So it's going to be very, very difficult because, as said from London, you know, the hard border means trouble. And of course, with the hard border, if there's a soft border, but Northern Ireland stays in the customs union, that means it's really having separate laws to England and Scotland and Wales, which of course the Conservative Party and many people in the UK don't want. But on the other hand, the election was 52% to leave, 48% to stay. So it's a big conflict. It's caused a lot of, let's say, polarities between people. In actual fact, it's made marriages fall apart. It's so serious.
What are your thoughts on this, the prospect on this border issue?
Well, for a year or two, we heard that it was impossible to solve the Irish border question. The European Union does help solve some problems. It removes the border between two countries that continue to be independent countries inside the European Union. So it's very difficult to solve that problem outside the Union. But I actually think that the deal that Theresa May brought from Brussels solves the problem. In my opinion, it solves the problem. It wasn't impossible to solve. The question is whether she can get support for that solution, which is a completely separate question. I personally think that this is the best solution the UK could hope for. And then it can be changed in the future. It will be a very long process of 1 or 2 decades until Brexit is completely realized. And so the people in the Conservative Party have to make a choice. Do they want Brexit or not? If they want Brexit, this is the best way to get it, I think, as Theresa May thinks, evidently. If they don't want Brexit, if they just want to affirm a symbolic position of some kind, then they're doing a good job. But I think people in the UK are worrying that now politics there is entirely symbolic, about grand statements and not about finding pragmatic solutions, which I still think is Theresa May's approach. It may still, we'll talk more about this, I'm sure. It may still work. It looks difficult now, but it may still work. I still think that's the most likely scenario, that in the end she'll be able to push a solution similar to this one through.
Is that the same likely scenario that you have in mind, Mr. Spears?
I would certainly hope that there's a resolution to the whole process. The big problem is that if they're holding UK to ransom in reality, they may go to the line, until the final day and change something. I do hope that does happen. It's either the devil or the deep blue sea. It's as simple as that at the moment, unfortunately.
But what are the possibilities for a no-deal Brexit scenario?
Well, very real at the moment, unfortunately. Very real. The big problem is that Europe needs an enemy to keep themselves together. There's a lot of big problems in Europe, as you probably know. France, Germany, Greece, Italy now. It's a shame, because this came from originally from the European economic community, a common market, if you wish, in 1972, which the UK voted to be part of. And unfortunately, it's become very political since then, because of course we want to stave off any further wars and similar. But the big problem is we're all very tribal, so we look after our own interests, and that's where the problem comes in. Theresa May's got a really hard job there, a very hard job.
And Mr. Mercurius, let me get your idea on this. Your thoughts on the possibility of a hard Brexit at this stage?
I think it is very high, because of course the fundamental problem is that the person who is now negotiating with the European Union, who is Theresa May, is politically so weakened in Britain now and so distrusted by many members of her own party that it is going to be very difficult to get her to get any proposal she brings to the British Parliament passed by the British Parliament. When 117 of her MPs rebel in this way, it is very difficult to see them agreeing to any kind of agreement of the sort that she is talking about, especially if she cannot get further negotiations, further agreements from Brussels for some kind of dilution of the backstop. Can I say something which is, I think also, it's partly her own misjudgment of the negotiations. She conducted these negotiations in some secrecy. She was warned by Mr. Juncker not to do so, but she disregarded that advice. And she also, especially in the first year when she was Prime Minister, raised expectations in Britain that she would be able to achieve a Brexit which brought Britain entirely out of the European Union and its single market and its customs union. So the fact that she does not appear to be delivering on these promises has undermined her position in Britain, and it has weakened her position in any negotiations. When that situation arises, there has to be a very real danger that we're going to end up on the 29th of March with no agreement at all. And I'm afraid that is what I think is the most probable outcome at the moment.
All right, we're going to have to take a short break here on the dialogue. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back to Dialogue. So earlier before the break, we were talking about the possibility of a hard Brexit, but if that does happen, what's the possible impact on economic and political institutions in the UK and even in the whole of Europe, Mr. Spears?
Well, from a very selfish point of view, from the UK's point of view, we're going to have problems going across to Europe because we trade with Europe immensely at the moment, and it's very important for us. In actual fact, we buy more from Europe we sell more to Europe than we buy from Europe. So, for example, there's going to be big problems, channel crossings with ferries. There's talk of making the M25 or some of the roads that way lorry parks, because it's going to take 12 hours or something for every lorry to be be passed, which is crazy. So it's going to be difficult, very, very difficult. And also with the air freight and similar, it'll be the same problem, because we need to all work together, really. And it's a shame that we've got to this stage. It's a shame that we've cannot resolve this amicably. And it's a shame we cannot resolve this in the interest of all parties. For example, Portugal and the UK have been, the first treaty together was in 1324, which is many, many years ago. We need to go back to those sort of things, not be tribal, but have our own interests together.
Yeah. Portugal and Britain might be the oldest allies in the world, I have to say.
That's right.
How are you looking at this? What are the possible impacts for example, the ties between the two countries, Britain and Portugal?
If there's no deal, the impact is going to be severe, which is the reason I think eventually there will be a way to overcome that. Possibly the deadline of March 29 will have to be postponed, although that has to be done by unanimous vote of all the 27 member states, which is difficult to get. But I think it's difficult to see the issue being resolved before then, but it could be postponed. We shouldn't underestimate the ability to muddle through, to find a solution in the very last moment. This has been my experience in the European Union over the past 5 or 10 years that I've been involved in EU politics. If there is no deal, I think the prospect of having airplanes being grounded, unable to fly, is so daunting, so intimidating, that I think a solution will be found. And finally, if there's no deal, there's different varieties of a no deal. People are now starting to talk about a managed no deal, which should consist of essentially not finding a solution to some of these issues, but trying to address the most urgent matters like air flights and things like that, so that there isn't complete chaos in the transition. So that's another possibility, something like that.
Yeah. I want to also get your response on what Mr. Mercure said earlier. It was because Ms. May's misjudgment that has led to the chaos at this stage. Do you agree with that, or not so much?
No, I don't totally agree with that. I do really recently agree with that. This all comes from having in 2016 the actual vote to stay in or stay out. And that was with David Cameron, so it cannot be totally blamed on Theresa May.
EU Council President Donald Tusk has just said the divorce agreement made with UK Prime Minister in late November is not open for renegotiation, and they are now seeking for the deal's ratification by European Parliament. So there you said it, no flexibility. But let's talk about the impact on currency. Now, we've already seen the pounds taking significant dive in recent days. What is the projected impact on currency markets in the short term and in the long term? Well,
it could be good for the UK with the pound going down to have more exports. I know when that went down in 2016, exports actually rose to China from the UK. It's not necessarily a good thing, of course not, because they've got the other underlying problems. And also people, they play the money markets, people are going to make money, and they see that it goes down, so they encourage it to go up, and it goes down again, and they sell when it's high and buy when it's low. So it's not just only the political thing. People actually do make money out of it.
Now, before Brexit, the EU was dealing for years with the eurozone crisis, with Greece in particular, and we have countries like Denmark, Ireland, Netherlands. They've all held referendums before rejecting EU's treaties and agreements. How did Brussels respond before? Let's talk about this. Is there any comparison that can be made between those situations and Brexit?
There is, obviously, and the EU is dealing with the situation in a way that is very similar. It appeals to rules that are inflexible, procedures that are very rigid, and waits for the other side essentially to compromise. And the EU will not compromise, not only because it's not in its interest to compromise, but also because it appeals to these rules that are very inflexible. Now, there's a question of whether this is really the same. The economic disruption could be much higher. I personally think that the EU is being a bit complacent, because the way supply chains are going to be disrupted, the way financial markets may be disrupted, because much of the hedging that is going on and that is crucial for companies to manage their balance sheets is happening in London. A no-deal scenario would also interfere with that, the process that is going on daily. Financial markets are essentially based in the city in London, and European companies, German companies, French companies depend on that. So we'll see. If it gets to that point, I think it's not only the UK, it's also the EU that will feel the pressure from financial markets. And
months ago, your economy minister, the Portuguese economy minister, said that an agreement on Brexit would be the desirable solution among available options for the UK's departure from the European Union. Do you stand by that?
Yes, I think that's the mainstream opinion in Europe. People have tried to be constructive. They've also been rather concerned, some say obsessed, about preserving unity in the EU. So the rigidity also comes from that. No one wants to volunteer a solution because then everyone will start doing it. So there's a very rigid approach to the process. I think William has stressed this. But remember, this is also an important point. This is only a preliminary stage in the negotiation. We haven't even entered the stage where you start talking about a trade deal, the future trade relationship, which I think is going to be much more difficult than this phase. So when you think about it, that even this is on the verge of collapsing, and it's the easy part of it, then you got to be worried.
Yeah. Now, Portugal earlier signed agreements with China on the Belt and Road Initiative, but some other EU countries remain very reluctant to embrace it. What do you think are the concerns on their mind?
I know from conversations that I had in private that in fact countries like Germany and France put a lot of pressure on the Portuguese government not to sign it, and Portugal eventually did last week or 10 days ago. The first country in Western Europe, by the way, because countries in Eastern and Central Europe had signed up to the Belt and Road, but not in Western Europe, so perhaps the first of many. Italy is considering it, and then we'll see about Spain. But Portugal had always had this approach of a global foreign policy, the so-called global Britain. We have the global Portugal. And so it doesn't surprise me that Portugal wants to establish close ties with China, leaving the issues and the problems to the side. You don't have to talk about the problems all the time. Focus on what you have in common and try to move it forward.
Yeah, and how will Brexit now affect the trade relations among EU, the US, and also China? What kind of changes might it bring about on the current China-US trade war?
Well, if everyone has good faith in each other, not too much, but unfortunately politically it will make a difference. What also we must remember is that Portugal had one of the maritime Silk Roads many, many years ago, and so it's lovely to see this extending now. You know, it's great, fantastic. You know, I just wish other countries to do it. The big problem was, of course, it's a question of the wording around the agreements. That was the problem in Europe. But in reality, Europe will continue to trade together. There will be ways around everything. There always is a way around everything. But I just do hope that let's say that the gun is not kept to the UK's head, because we must also remember the UK pay in 14% of the budget for the European Union, and I think they may get back about 8%. So naturally, it's a positive input to Europe. The other countries, like we mentioned, Denmark and similar, 2 or 3% at the most. So what we're saying is, look, UK, if you get out, we're going to make it difficult for you, so no one else try and get out. So it's also that situation. I mean, it's politics. One day in politics is a long time.
Yeah, and Mr. Mercury is in London. Talk to us about, you know, how Brexit negotiation process is impacting the currency market there. What are the market sentiment?
Well, I think that the mood is one of great uncertainty. If you look at the way the markets have been moving, they've been volatile. But can I just say, I think that the fundamental problem is not what is going to happen on the 29th of March if we have a no-deal Brexit. I think there will be great volatility, great uncertainty, but I think we will probably find a way to get through any immediate problems which arise. I think what is worrying markets and what is worrying business people in general is that because of this all-consuming interest in Brexit, the government is no longer thinking in any kind of strategic way about the economy. So things that ought to be done are not being done because all energy is being now absorbed by this issue. And if we have a situation where Britain crashes out of the European Union without any kind of agreement on the 29th of March, an economy, which is the British economy, which is highly dependent on inward investment from all sorts of countries, including China, is going to find it very difficult to continue to attract those investment flows, given that one of the reasons why that investment comes to Britain is in order to use Britain to trade with the rest of the European Union. If Britain cannot provide that entry point to the rest of the Union, which comes from European Union membership, that inward investment may slow, and that might be difficult for an economy like the British, which is so dependent upon it. So all of these things are uncertain, and at the moment we just do not know what is going to be the position in March.
Great uncertainty there. And Mr. Mercury's, earlier we were talking about, you know, the Northern Irish backstop element being the major hurdle, but what about other issues? What about EU citizen rights in the UK and Britain's contribution to EU's finance? What are some of the discussions going on there in the public?
I think that there are discussions almost certainly going on on a technical basis, even if there is a no-deal Brexit, because the British are now preparing for it. The Europeans are now unquestionably also preparing for it. I think we will probably see some kind of arrangements being put in place after March and April to enable people to move, so that people in Britain who are European Union citizens find that they still have the right to continue in employment here, that British people who have businesses and properties in Europe can continue to travel to them. I think we will find a way to deal with these things, and I think that this will not be a short-term thing. I think we will have long-term solutions. But in terms of Britain itself, there is now severe questions about the internal cohesion of Britain, because of course Northern Ireland is unhappy about leaving the European Union because of the risk of the hard border. Scotland voted strongly to remain in the European Union. England voted to leave. So we now have growing instability within Britain itself, which has never existed before. Britain has been a very stable country up to now, but all of these factors are now in play. And again, we don't really know very much about how all this is going to play out in the future.
Yeah, we'll just wait and see. And Mr. Spears, what about all the implications for European integration?
Indeed. First thing I must say, I think Britain is still a very stable country. It's just the politicians are unstable. That's the big problem. So it's the question you're saying, how it's going to integrate in the future. I think they're going to pull back from the line at the end of the day. You know, to have a hard border across Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland wish to stay in the EU anyway, would be absolutely crazy. It would take us back 40, 50 years, you know, with the situation between Northern and Southern Ireland, and that's not the way forward in the world nowadays. But I really hope that we can overcome this crazy relationship or feeling of relationship, so the customs union as such, so we can sort of cover our own laws, if you wish, but at the same time still trade with Europe, because trade is about everything really. If you don't trade together, we're not making money together. And
final remarks from you, Mr. Massais, your perspective on future integration process of entire Europe.
It's not going very well either. You remember that President Macron of France put forward some proposals. They were not very well received by Germany. In the meantime, all the other countries felt a bit left out. So the process is going on. It's rather independent of Brexit. I think some people hope that without the UK, Europe would integrate much faster. I was always very skeptical about that, because I know the obstacles don't have to do with UK. They are internal to the other 27 member states. And so the process is going to be slow. And in fact, now it looks to have lost the steam that it had with Macron and when he won the presidency. We have to solve the problems in our hands. The refugee migration crisis is not solved. The Brexit is not solved. The eurozone crisis is still bubbling under the surface. So solve those problems first, and then think about the next stage of integration.
All right, that's the time we have for now. Thank you so much, Mr. Bruno Massais and Mr. William Spears, joining me here in our Beijing studio, and also over in London, Mr. Alexander Mercuries. Thank you all for your insights and analysis, and that does it for this edition of Dialogue on CGTN. Thank you for accompanying me. Bye for now.